Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the first ever episode of the Doctor Who spin-off series Class. For tonight, we might die. Written by its creator, Peter Nass, and is directed by, the first episode anyway, is directed by Ed Balzaghetti. Sorry if I've completely butchered that name. But yeah, this was a very interesting, strange period within the Doctor Who community. This was at a time when it was steering through the Peter Capaldi, Stephen Moffat era. This was after Series 8 and Series 9, an era of the series which really was divisive and was seeing some of the revival era's lowest rated episodes in the revived era of Doctor Who. And it was decided that for a year, the series would be taking a break, only really going for one Christmas episode from the next. And also, some of you might be wondering why I'm tackling Class before the 2015 Christmas special, because 2016 was the one when this aired. It's because chronologically, for the Doctor, this takes place first. So despite it airing later, it actually takes place first. But that's beside the point. And that's why I'm putting it here. That was the point I was trying to make. So I can almost remember the day. I think it was back in 2015. The BBC were hyping up this new and very exciting information. Something big is going to happen, and a lot of people got excited. A lot of people were theorizing it's something to do maybe with the multi-Doctor. I remember one of the biggest theories was that it was a reprisal of a companion, maybe Billie Piper returning as Rose Tyler. But that was completely off the mark, as we got introduced to a brand new spin-off in Class. For those of you, Class is centered around Coal Hill School. For those of you who don't know, Coal Hill School is one of the primary locations in the Doctor Who universe. It was where Susan went to when she first appeared in An Unearthly Child. The Doctor's granddaughter was there, and two of the teachers that became the Doctor's first companions, Ian and Barbara, were teachers there. Years later down the line, the series would reuse this location in the 50th anniversary Day of the Doctor, where it turns out Clara had become a teacher working there, and it also appeared in the episode Caretaker. And one of the teachers actually from the episode Caretaker actually reprises his role here. From what I remember, this is his only appearance in the show, and that's literally the only Doctor Who character beside the Doctor himself that appears, and it's really strange, it's really bizarre. And when this was announced, there was a lot of mixed, mainly to negative feelings. It felt really strange, out of place. It felt like the BBC didn't know what type of demographic it was going for. And not really, because it was clearly a teenage show, that edgy. It has that campy, it has that silliness to it, but it's also full of guts and sex and maybe drugs and stuff. It's all that shenanigans of teenage dramas that were quite popular around the time. However, it didn't feel like this would fit within the Doctor Who canon, and even by the trailers, it felt like a really odd and strange choice to make. So how did the show even came to be? Well, there's multiple conflicting stories. Of course, one of the big reasons for the show to be made in the first place was that Doctor Who was taking essentially a year off, with only really a Christmas special at the end of 2016. Also, a fun fact, the first episode of Class, the one we're talking about, aired on the 10th anniversary of Torchwood. The first episode of Torchwood, Everything Changes. That's just... so it's like a kind of celebration of Doctor Who's first spin-off with a brand new spin-off. But it's not to do with any particularly character. Nobody from the show is anybody big within the series itself. It's very strange like that. From the story, there's two different stories going around. Many state that the idea came out for a new spin-off, and Peter Ness was asked to then develop a series which BBC Three the host of this series, really did enjoy his pitch. However, according to Peter Ness, this actually started off as a unused episode of the Doctor Who series. For those who don't know, Peter Ness hasn't actually written for the series itself, and the way he describes it, he pitched an idea for a episode. However, they were fully booked, and the BBC just kind of offered him his entire series, and that sounded really great. That sounded like really cool, putting a lot of edge and a lot of chances on this one person. But they gave him a lot of baggage. He wrote every single episode in the series. Sure, it's only 8 episodes long, but think about it. Doctor Who, which is one of the most expansive, one of the most creative-driven series, is still written by a bunch of people within one series. They actually expected this guy to write an entire series worth just on his own. You've got to give it props for that. And I haven't even talked about the story itself. So, shall we delve right in? The episode itself starts off pretty decent with seemingly a chase scene where a character is being chased around by some sort of entity, and then gets followed up by one of the teachers there, who asks this person to try and shoot a gun, and then we hear a sound effect, and we hear somebody screaming. Presumably that student is now no longer with us. He's passed away. He's passed to the other life, and so we kind of get this hearing. The story has a very weak narrative flow to it, because the story implies that there have been multiple times that this has occurred, where a student has encountered these entities, and this kind of situation where they have to hold a gun only for them to die has occurred throughout the Coal Hill School for about maybe a month, maybe a week at the least. And nobody makes a big deal out of that. It's literally the references to like people going missing is just kind of, oh yeah, people have gone missing. And then later on, right at the end of the episode, where one of the characters is being essentially stood up to what her beliefs are. And it's here that we actually get some really great directing by Ed, as we get a really great shot of like a majority of the characters going into the school, and there's a lot of panning, there's a lot of great angles, and it switches around the characters and some of the extras behind the scenes, and it does actually do a great job at introducing us to some of the characters. This is the kind of series where instead of having all your main characters pushed to the forward at once, it's more of like a revolving door. You have a team, and the characters basically just change whether they are the main characters or not. That's really how I pictured the series. I have seen the series before many years ago, so this rewatch is the first time I've seen it in a while. So from memory, that's the kind of series this is, and it does kind of hurt the opening episode, as we are supposed to be introduced to this brand new team, but we only really get a handful of character traits and character connections to some of them. So let's get on to the team of Class. Who are the Class cast? One of the main characters is April, played by Sophie Hopkins. She has a very sweet, loving personality to her, but she can kind of sense, the character April anyway, she can kind of sense that people kind of find her as fragile, and she needs kind of something to kind of push her into being a much more independent person. And this is the story that basically sums up to her. She's easily the standout of the story, but the thing is with this story, she actually gets nothing to do here. She's a nice character, but the story gives her nothing to do in terms of the action and the consequences and any sort of stakes in terms of what she believes in, as well as not having have any particular role in the story other than set up something for the finale of the story for the series, as we get introduced more to the villain of the series. But in terms of her as a character and Sophie Hopkins as an actress, both are well developed here, and both and Sophie Hopkins is great, and I really like to see more of Sophie Hopkins. I wish that she actually appeared in the series proper, and she was given time to develop her character as more. Now we get into the two alien characters. We get to Quill, played by the legendary Catherine Kelly, who you might better know as Becky from Coronation Street. She gives that kind of attitude that she brings to her role in Coronation Street, however, with an alien persona. She easily has some of the best lines in the story. One of my favorites is basically they're trying to hide that all these characters know something. There's this alien conspiracy. One of the characters walks in and she just turns around and it's like, "Leave us! We are decorating!" That bit always cracks me up. And she easily has the most prominent in the role, as well as the other alien character, Charlie, played by Greg Austin. And these two basically are the main vocal points of the narrative. Essentially, what we learn throughout the story is that once there was this peace treaty, however, there was this rebellious group, freedom fighters as they call themselves, with Quill being the leader, and was trying to basically overthrow the government, with Charlie actually being the prince of this committee. And but however, during the time of them invading, to which Quill has been given a alien entity into her brain, which basically turns her into a sort of slave for Charlie. She can't harm Charlie in any way, and she can't basically conspire against him, but she also cannot leave him. She cannot abandon him. She has to basically look after him. It's essentially like a forced carer, and some of that drama comes into the narrative. But during all this, there was an alien race invading their planet, basically wiping the entire race out overnight, leaving our two characters as the last of their kind. These alien race known as the Shadow Kin, Kin, go around and they basically stick to somebody's shadow until its time is free, and they all just kill and stab. And it's a really great premise for a villain. However, these characters are later saved by the Doctor, and they are then taken to Kill Hill School, where the Doctor leaves them there to try and blend in and try to fit in as essentially as asylum seekers, which is very prominent to when I'm recording this, because as I'm recording this, Russia and Ukraine are currently in war, so that's pretty interesting. So yeah, but in terms of narrative, these characters are easily the most important. They have the most prominent in it, with Quill, and there's some really great debates here. I really do like these two characters, especially with the topic of when Quill has this creature in her head, and she basically feels like she's a slave, but Charlie doesn't kind of see it. He's a much more loving, caring, kind person, but he has this philosophy that kind of allows him to do this to Quill, to try to force rehabilitate, essentially. And their dynamic, them two characters together, really make the bulk of what makes this episode great. However, none of the other characters seem to be interested in that, despite it being one of the most vocal and one of the most interesting points in the narrative. This story doesn't really focus on it, and it is a kind of a real shame. That should have been essentially one of the main plots of the narrative, but it's kind of pushed up as, yeah, we'll do something with that later. But how, from my memory, they do something with that, and they do take it in interesting ways. So that's, I will state now, it does get better. However, I feel like in terms of interesting characters, until at least for the first episode, that's where it kind of draws the line, as the rest of the characters are basically introduced here as secondary characters. We get Ram, played by Fadi Elstayed, I believe that's pronounced his name. Fun fact, he was actually meant to appear, the actor anyway, was meant to appear in the 11th Doctor story, The Bells of St. John. In fact, he shot scenes for that episode. However, that story needed reshoots and he was unavailable at the time, so his scenes had to be cut. So that's really interesting. Here, you do get this build-up of a sort of interesting character here. He's somebody who kind of has to constantly get pushed all the time. He's kind of living in a masculine environment. His father kind of gets disappointed with him when he gets distracted by girls, and his coach is basically rough with him. There's not a lot here to deal with, and it's not really much there in terms of substance here. However, it does go into a much more interesting dynamic in later episodes, especially what happens to him at the near the end of this story. We also get Tanya, played by Vivian Oprah, and I honestly can't tell you a thing about her. Basically, the character is a character who, she's much more younger than the rest of the classmates. However, because she was so smart and she was so high IQ, but she was basically pushed forward a few years in her classes, and she was basically in the same year with the rest of her characters, despite being a lot younger. I believe they say 14, whereas the other characters are about 16, 17. I could be wrong here. Yeah, there's nothing really much substance there. They do give her plenty of screen time that you do realise that she is going to be an important character, or at least that she is part of the main cast. You can't say that, however, for Mendez. Again, I'm sorry I butchered her name. Played by Jordan Renzo, a Polish boy who accidentally falls in love with Charlie, and they have a gay relationship. And that's honestly, that's the only thing you can name about this character. He's only there to be Charlie's love interest, and he has literally like nothing towards him. And for some reason, like he's always like assembled into the cast as if like he's one of the main characters. He's not. He's just really a side character in the group of people. It's very strange. I feel like to get Charlie a much more interesting development, we needed a bit more of Mendez. Again, I'm butchering that name. I do apologize. And so, because of his, because he is such a weak character in terms of a narrative, great actor Jordan Renzo. I don't know if he's actually Polish in real life, but it's very convincing, and he does have this humorous personality about him. It's just a shame that the character isn't there much to substance. And I think if the relationship here needed to work, there needs to be a much more stronger bond with the character. Literally, from what we gather, Charlie asks, I'm just going to call him Matt, to the prom. The next time we see the characters, Matt's coming out of his house and is having an argument with his family because he's going to the prom with a boy. And then that's it in terms of the drama of that and their relationship and what that interests into the episode. I feel like there should be a lot more drama there, especially when you consider that Charlie, he comes from a planet, he comes from a world opposite to Earth. So in that case, he doesn't see what's so socially inconvenient, shall we say, about homosexuality. And yeah, it's just a really strange character to involve, and I wish they did something more to it within the series. From my memory, that's something that doesn't actually happen within the series itself. And now let's get on to the main villain, the Shadow King, King. Yes, the Shadow King is the king of the Shadow Kin. It's really confusing. Now, he's played, interestingly, by Paul Mark Davis, who is very important to the whole fandom of Doctor Who, as he's the only actor to be in Class, Doctor Who, Torchwood, and the Sarah Jane Adventures. He's the only person to appear in all live-action spin-offs, as well as the main series proper, unless you count K9 and Company. But we don't. So, yeah, the main villain really doesn't have much of a substance in terms of character. He literally appears right at the end. The ending is something that we got to talk about as well. And in terms of character, there's nothing much there. And he's supposed to be built up as a very important character, as we basically learn that the gun that Quill was getting the students to shoot actually kind of makes a connection with its intended victim. And these Shadowkin, they basically can't die without the use of this gun. And so it like links into the person who is shooting it and then basically kills them. She tries to trick April into using the gun. However, Charlie blocks the gun, moves the gun out of the way, only slightly hitting the Shadow King. This connects them in a way where they're both alive, however, they share the same heart. Logically, I don't know how that works, but it does lead into some interesting moments and scenes where the characters can connect, and they kind of have this psychic link, and there's also some humorous moments in later episodes. Again, kind of pushing all the interesting stuff to the side. Speaking of pushing interesting things to the side, one thing about a pilot episode, one thing about a spin-off, about the first episode of a spin-off, is that you've got to show what's so interesting about this. What makes this a standout to the regular series? Why should anybody watch this whilst also watching or even above the main series Doctor Who? And the series gives you absolutely nothing. The characters come up with plans, they come up with ideas, where mainly Quill and Charlie. Like I said, April, despite being a lovely, interesting character, hasn't got much precedent into the plot. And Tanya and Ram and Matt Montezes, they don't really have much in terms of the role of the story. And they basically build up and everything basically fails, only for suddenly to appear the sounds of the TARDIS. And comes out of nowhere is Peter Capaldi reprising his role as the 12th Doctor, which I would like to state, this does chronologically take place before the 2015 Christmas special, despite airing after. Now, Capaldi gives his absolute A-game here. You could kind of get the special guest appearance by the Doctor himself. And there's just a really great kick to his appearance. There's a great line where the Shadow King basically explains what he wants. He wants this device known as the Cabinet, to which the 12th Doctor is like, oh, that's easy. There's a great weird shop called IKEA. I absolutely love that line. Absolutely nailed it. But really, honestly, the Doctor's appearance here is a massive, complete, like, ocean-wide issue for the story. Because none of our characters actually save the day or do anything to result in the ending of the story. Literally, our characters getting into predicament, it goes way out of their hands, and then the Doctor comes in and saves them. And that is such a terrible way to open your first episode, your first series. And it really hinders onto the narrative. I've also forgot to mention, there are some really strange, odd moments in the story. One really odd moment is when Tanya goes to the shop after she's getting chased by a Shadow King, and this old woman starts talking about how she found her husband in a position, shall we say. It's just really strange little moments like that. That's the main one that sticks in my head. But there's some important details here that goes important for the rest of the series. Mainly is what happens to Ram, as his girlfriend, who the girl he takes to the prom, not a very important character, so I didn't feel the need to mention her. She gets, like, obliterated. Not just killed, but obliterated. They're just talking, having a nice time, and then suddenly a sword comes through out of her chest, and she bloody explodes. And Ram spends the rest of the episode just covered in blood. It's like absolutely horrifying. And not only that, the Shadow King chops off one of his legs. It's really gruesome and it really comes out of place, especially when nothing in the episode actually has anything to do with that kind of grossness, and the fact that it just seems like they're punishing this character in terms of this story, in terms of this narrative. Like, if this was the only episode, it just seems like they were punishing him to make it even more cooler for when the Doctor saves the day. However, that isn't the case. They actually do take this into a very interesting and dynamic ways in later episodes. And what happens then is that the Doctor basically, as he does in his own series, in his own episodes, is he basically just gives Ram a prosthetic leg, and kind of just like, oh, you'll be fine, just don't show your leg to anybody. Something similar to what happened to Adam in the Series 1 story, The Long Game, where during the events of the episode, one of the characters is augmented to try and survive, shall we say, and the Doctor just kind of, oh, you'll be fine, and you'll be okay. Now that's actually kind of interesting what the series does, where we will see how that affects our character, because he literally has just seen his girlfriend just absolutely obliterate in front of him, as well as losing his leg, which will affect him physically, and his physical self is something that's really important to him, is his health and his stamina, to his love of the sport of football, and as well to his family and friends. And so that is taken into interesting development in later episodes. However, here, because they don't do anything with it, because it's literally at the end of the story, it means that this is a very, very, very weak opener. And that's what you could say mainly for the rest of the story. Was despite having some really interesting characters, I say really interesting, it has a handful of interesting characters that are interesting enough that I would watch, and maybe an episode or two with them later. However, here, they're not interesting enough, but I can really see what the story, why the series was made. And I feel like that's one of the big failures of this story, is that it doesn't show you what makes class any good. Literally, they put them to predicaments, they put their characters through the rim, only for the Doctor to later save the day, and it's kind of weak in substance. And that's a crying shame. And so, for Tonight We Might Die is a pretty weak start to a series that a lot of people have forgotten about. In fact, before I wrap up the story, this video, I just want to let know a little funny note of this story, of this series, shall I say. In my college, after I left my college and I talked to people who were in classes younger than me, and they were talking about their experiences in media college, in media studies, they told me that class was actually used as an example how not to promote and develop a series, which is just really funny. It's just really funny to me. So anyway, that is Class for Tonight We Might Die. So join me next time where we'll be going back to the main series proper, as the Doctor is reunited with his one true love, Adventure. But not with any Avenger, with a sort of companion. So join me next time for the husbands of River Song. And I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-ra.